Alright, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasul Nabi Kareem. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. Welcome to a presentation entitled Pornography slash Cybersex Addiction, Prevalence, Causes, and Solutions. My name is AbdulAziz Syed. I'm a social worker and this is through Khalid Center, inshallah. So before we get started, just a few quick things about me. And my experience working in this realm, and then we'll go over what this is all about, what we're going to cover, what we're not going to cover, and then inshallah slowly we will trickle into some of the content, go over some of the recommendations, and then open the floor for some Q&A, inshallah. So a little bit of background about me. So currently I'm a therapist, a licensed social worker at Khalid Center. I'm also a certified sex addiction therapist, CSA candidate, which means I'm still undergoing my training, halfway through it. And then I'm also the members experience manager at Purify Your Gaze, which is an online community for Muslims who are struggling with online sexual behaviors or sexually compulsive behaviors. I've been doing that for 3 years. So I've been in this realm for a few years now, depending upon the depending upon the setting. So that's where, all this work comes in. So with regards to the presentation, a little bit of overview. So we'll be going over 3 big areas. So the prevalence, the causes and the solutions, and the prevalence will be defining what pornography / cybersex is all about. What are some of the statistics out there about that? And then what do we call addiction? What is this addiction? How does one know one's addicted or not? We'll go into a lot of that discussion. Then we'll go over the causes from the micro, which is the individual, to the family, and then we'll talk about some societal trends as well that may be contributing to these. And then we'll talk about some solutions from the individual, familial, and the community-wide sense as well, inshallah. This presentation will not be and be about certain things. It will not be about, 1 second. Sorry, hold on. Can you guys see it now? Okay. Showing up. So the presentation will not be about the discussion and the discourse that's there about addiction versus compulsivity, because there's a whole discussion about it. There's a lot of scientific literature, for both sides. That's an in-depth discussion. It would be that's again beyond the scope of this discussion and this discourse. So that will not go over that. The presentation will not be so detailed. The presentation is, again, this is more of an overview of how things work and giving us an idea and an appreciation for each of the elements that take part within this process. It will not go over in depth into any specific type of approach or modality for healing. It will go over an overview for some of the ones that I'm familiar with and some of the ones that are out there. And then, again, there's always the idea of comorbidity, which is, again, a coexistence of an addiction with another mental health disorder or something along those lines. So we will not be going over that as well. And the presentation will be about, again, overview of the issue. We'll go over certain elements and we'll talk in depth about it, how it impacts Muslims. There will be brief discussion about that as well. And, again, building an appreciation as a start to see how this is going to work, and then strategies that can be employed as prevention strategies and some level of intervention at every level. So, that begs the question, what exactly is pornography? or cybersex. So pornography is the depiction of erotic behavior, as in pictures or writing intended to cause sexual excitement, as is there in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And then cybersex, pornography is a part of cybersex. Cybersex is any kind of online pornography or audio, video, or text stories or any kind of material that's online. And that sometimes it may involve real time with a fantasy partner. So again, cybersex is a bigger category that may include video, which could be pornography. It could do photo, it could be audio, it could be phone, anything along those lines. They all play a part in that. So some quick statistics to show the prevalence of this. So this was in 2014. So again, before we go into too much depth about statistics, one thing to note is that there's several different types of organizations that are doing this kind of work. There's three main sources that I've come across. One is this is big in the Christian community, in the faith-based community, and they have their filters, they have their own research that they're doing, surveys, and things along those lines. And then what they can look at is they collect their own data. Secondly, the data from the porn industry themselves. And I've chosen one that's a popular site and the statistics that they've thrown out for the past 2 years. So inshallah, I will be covering that and part of it. And the third one is some general research that is done. I won't be going over too much of that because the idea isn't necessarily to give what's the exact number, what's not. Again, we can go over that till we're blue in the face. The idea is to give an appreciation for how prevalent this is. So this is from the Filter Research Statistics, according to a survey conducted by the Barna Group in the US in 2014. So again, this was Barna Group through the Proven Men Ministries. The following percentage of men say they view pornography at least once a month. These are 18 to 30-year-olds, 79%, 31 to 49-year-olds, 67%, and 50 to 60-year-olds, 49%. The following percentages of men say they view pornography at least several times a week. 18 to 30-year-olds, 63%. So 63% of young adults and a little over that as well are viewing it, more than half of them. So that number is pretty big. And then 31 to 49-year-olds, they're 38%, and then 50 to 60-year-olds, 25%. And then again, we talk about gender differences. The following percent of women say they view pornography at least once a month. 18 to 30-year-olds, 76%. 31 to 49-year-olds, 16%. 50 to 60-year-olds, 4%. The following percent of women say they pornography at least several times a week. 18 to 30-year-old, 21%. 49 to 31, 49, 5, and then 50 to 68, 0. 55% of married men say they watch porn at least once a month, compared to 70% of not married men. So it's important to recognize, and this is data related to adults. This is related to, and it's hard to track data for those that are younger because we know that early exposure happens quite often, actually. And we'll go over some numbers for that. But as you can see, these numbers are huge, and you'll see what the implication is from a global perspective when we go into some of the other statistics moving forward. So continue. So this is some of the data that they found for younger. So again, those that are not adults yet. So 71% of teens have done something to hide what they do online from their parents. Browsing a browser history, minimizing a browser, deleting inappropriate video, lying about behavior, using a phone instead of a computer, blocking social media privacy, all those things that are out there that give access to pornography, that many of our youth are very tech savvy, so they're able to cover their tracks, so to speak. 32% of teens admit to intentionally accessing nude or pornographic content online. Of these, 43% do on a weekly basis. So this is 43% of teens. If we were to generalize these results, that's a huge number. It's a huge number. And only 12% of parents knew their teens were accessing pornography. So that's a very, very important and a very key point to think about. Then we move on to the statistics from a famous or well-known pornography website called Pornhub. And they actually released their statistics, boasting about it actually. And these two are from 2015, and then there's some statistics from 2016. But as you can see, most of their consumption is now happening through mobile technology. So 52.9% of all pornography that has been accessed through their website has been on a phone, and then 36% on a desktop, and then 10.8 through a tablet. And as you can see, from 2014 to 2015, it's the usage has shot up 17. So basically, what constitutes the addiction? Again, it's chronic brain reward, motivation, memory-related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic of biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestation, reflected by individual pathologically pursuing reward or relief by substance use or other behaviors. So again, those behaviors fall into that. Let me check something really quick. There might be an echo here. Let's see. Okay. Okay, cool. So moving on. So what is the 10 criterion for addiction? So one of the foremost experts in this realm is, his name is Dr. Patrick Carnes. Let's see here. Okay, so okay, it seems like still echo. Okay, there seems to be an echo for some reason. Okay, I think it should be better now. Should be good now. Apologize. So what's the 10 criterion for addiction? So and he came up with this because, again, anyone can say, oh, they're addicted to this. People say, oh, I'm addicted to food, I'm addicted to this or that. It's one of those things. So how do you truly know? How do you truly know? So he came up with a 10 criterion for addiction. And for those, for people who really want to know, there's simple tests they take, but these are some clear indicators that someone may be struggling with some addictive behaviors, regardless of what it is. So number one, loss of control. So clear behavior in which you do more than what you intend or want to do, right? So you're losing some level of control. Number two, compulsive behavior. So it's a pattern of out of control behavior over time. So again, it's going a little bit out of hand over time. Number three, efforts to stop. Your efforts to stop, repeated specific attempts to stop this behavior have failed or continuously fail. Loss of time. So significant amount of time is lost either doing the behavior or recovering from it. So again, not just doing it, but also recovering from it. So it shows that it takes a toll on you. Preoccupation. Obsessing over the behavior, you're thinking about it, or you're obsessing because of what you may have done, like the behavior itself. So let's say if someone viewed pornography, which is it's connected with masturbation as well most of the time, they obsess about it because of what they may have done. Inability to fulfill obligations. So the behavior, so acting out or pornography, masturbation, cybersex, this behavior interferes with their work, their school, their family, and their friends to some degree. Continuation of the action despite consequences. So they fail to stop the behavior even though problems have been encountered, like social, legal, financial, physical, spiritual, emotional. Problems have been faced, yet the person goes back to the behavior. Number 8 is escalation. So there's a need to make the behavior more intense. There's a need to do more of it, more frequently, and sometimes even more risky, because there's that risks arouses us a little bit more to some degree. So that also plays a part in that. Number 9, losses. So losing, limiting, or sacrificing certain things that the person considers to be very important, like hobbies or like family, relationships, work, school. Those losses are being incurred because of the behavior or engaging in that behavior. And then last but not least is withdrawal. So cutting out the behavior, trying to stop the behavior, causes considerable distress, anxiety, restlessness, irritability, annoyance, or physical discomfort. So these 10 things, if a person feels like these things are interacting or these things are there, they indicate that this may be becoming an addiction, because there's withdrawal symptoms. This person can't let go of it even though they've tried to. So these traditional mechanisms of addiction are coming up. So that covers the prevalence and what it is. So we've defined what pornography is. We've defined cybersex. We've looked at some of the numbers, which is, again, that's just one website that people have spent 574,000 years in just 2016. And imagine what that number is for, if you look at all the websites and the time people spend on them together. It's just mind-blowing. So let's move on to some of the causes and the contributors of these things. So I'm just gonna, okay. So there's various reasons, and Risparma and Satasma, they did some research in 2013, and they came up with 2 categories. So there's the classic reasons for sexual addiction, similar to pornography addiction. And then there's some modern reasons, which are more recent. So previously, and again, it doesn't mean that it may not be the case currently. Some of the reasons why people turn to this kind of an addiction, or addiction in general, is there could be a history of abuse in the family. Could be physical, spiritual, sexual, could be emotional. There's insecure attachment. So sex addiction in the clinical world, they call it an intimacy disorder. So what does that mean, an intimacy disorder? Intimacy, as some of you may have heard, is defined as into me you see. So there's that connection, there's that bond, there's a deep, loving relationship. And it doesn't have to be in a relationship, in a romantic relationship, but it could be with any person or people. People who struggle with pornography addiction or sexual addiction have a very hard time having meaningful, deep, vulnerable relationships with people. They may be very kind, they may be very gentle, or they could be elsewhere, but it's very hard for them to be able to really connect and genuinely open and genuinely show themselves as who they are, rather than feeling like they need to put on a mask. So not being able to connect with people, always feeling like people are going to judge them, always feeling like, like people can't be trusted because they may have been hurt in the past, they have a very difficult time truly connecting with other people. Third is poor impulse control. So, impulses come up for everything. And these people may exhibit some level of poor impulse control. They have the impulsivity to do something and they end up doing it. 4 is cross addictions. So cross addictions could be, again, there's a lot of overlap between, substance abuse, or alcohol abuse versus sexual addiction, smoking, any kind of other drugs or drug abuse that are used. So there's always that some level of interaction between them, and that contributes to it. Comorbid mood disorders. So we're not going to go too much into depth, but again, psychological disorders do impact and also act as a reason or a contributor to sexual behavior, whether online or in person. And last is they are used to soothe toxic emotions. Many people have a very hard time working through their feelings. So when people, and we'll go over Dr. Karn's model where we can show an example and talk about how that plays a part. Many people use this as a way to soothe their emotions. So if people who drink, a lot of times they say, oh well, I drink because I want to turn that nagging voice off in my head. I don't want to worry about things. I want to just let it go. I don't want to think about things. Or I'm feeling really bad, and people start, it's stereotypically we see it. People start, using substances or alcohol when they cannot cope or work through their challenging emotions, which may be pain, hurt, anger, sadness, grief. So similarly, people do use pornography, masturbation as a way to soothe toxic emotions, to basically numb those feelings. So what are some of the modern reasons? This is where things get a little interesting, because someone who may be not necessarily addicted, but has a hard time letting go of pornography or masturbation, is because what we call sexual conditioning. So majority of people growing up in this country, 18 to 30, their sexual education has come from pornography or any kind of sexual material. So they're conditioned in a way where they respond to those things, and also there's a lot of research that talks about the adolescent brain as it's developing. The implication of exposing it to pornography at a very young age is very detrimental, because it becomes part of, because let's say they come across it and they find it arousing, then and it's over and over, it's right there, and there's chronic exposure to graphic online content, and the content is limitless. There was an author that once said that people are now seeing more, so again, this could be a ticket for a man, since we know men and women both watch pornography, at different percentages, of course, but a boy of 15, 16 or younger has probably seen a lot more women in his life in probably 10 minutes of online searching than his older generation saw in their entire lifetime. I mean, that's something, because we're not wired, and we'll talk about our porn, our brains on porn, because they are not used to these things. Our brain is not developed to expose these things. So when there's early exposure, there's chronic exposure. So it's over and over. It's over. It's not just one time. That it happens at an early age, and then it happens over and over again, and there's no end to it. You can click 5 times and you'll pop up 5 different videos and 5 different people. So that really is rewiring their brain to think about novelty, excitement, and sexual experiences. And these people may have never had sex. They have never ever would have had sex. But again, they're isolated, and the culture shift right now is trending towards virtual and non-relational sex. So it's more like, well, why do I have to put up with this person? I can just go turn to porn and I'm done. I get what I want. I'm good. So some of these reasons may be contributing to the more wider epidemic or wider addiction of pornography or cybersex, because of these reasons compared to the classical. But there's usually an intersectionality between the two, depending upon the individual who is seeking treatment. So we talked about a little bit of the neuroscience of addiction, and it is important to understand, and this is a vast science. I would encourage all of you, and I do list it in the resources. There's a website called Your Brain on Porn. They really have a lot of good material. There's so many journal articles that are coming out about how porn is technically rewiring your brain. Like it's literally changing how the brain works. So some thoughts, quick thoughts here, so that way we have an appreciation for the neuroscience, or some of it, like how does it become like a brain disorder sometimes. So research has shown that the mechanism by which, and many of you may know this from your sugar documentaries or documentaries about food, like, your brain is the same on sugar as it is on crack, or is it on meth. Similar, not the same, excuse me. The similar mechanism applies for porn, because the high that you get, and again, this is the key point, sex is a biologically wired mechanism inside the brain. So it has a very strong hold in the evolutionary perspective of us people, because procreation is one of the more core things that we do as human beings. So, but our brains can differentiate between a screen and an actual person, especially when there's overexposure and there's pleasure coming from it. So here's what ends up happening. So people talk about dopamine, right? Dopamine, as the researchers talk about, dopamine is more related to the craving of the substance that is going to bring pleasure, not the pleasure itself. Those are different substances. So here's what ends up happening. So a person craves, they were exposed to it. They've watched it over and over again. The brain then senses that this is something that they really is something that brings them relief, is doing something for them, brings them a sense of not just relief but pleasure. But here's what ends up happening: if it's overstimulated, then what ends up happening is the pleasure itself becomes desensitized. So as you can see, there's receptors, and then dopamine is released, and then it takes it in, and then it's there's a lot more of it. But then because our body adapts to things, it lowers the receptors, so it desensitizes the pleasure response. So again, there's craving, then there's the pleasure response. So the pleasure is the action itself. Craving is I want it. Pleasure is afterwards. So the feeling, the euphoria, the good feeling that comes afterwards. So those are two different things. So here's what ends up happening, because dopamine is related to the lack of dopamine is related to the cravings, and because the person is stimulated over and over again, the brain circuitry that's related to knowing that this is a good circuit to tap into becomes really solid, and it becomes what they call, it becomes sensitized. So brain circuits involved in motivation and reward-seeking behavior become hypersensitive to memories or cues related to the addictive behavior. It's like like the Pavlovian dogs, for those of you for your like psychology geeks, like it's increased in wanting and craving in that when whatever that thing is going to give them. But here's what ends up happening. Sensitization happens for the craving. So the person craves more of it. But here's the flip side. The pleasure that they receive from the actual action over time desensitizes. So the cravings increase, but when the person actually does the thing, they don't feel as great. So naturally what's going to happen? They're going to need more of it, or they're going to need different. And the internet is providing that. The internet is providing that. So the cycle then becomes more like the person has to binge. They have to take more of it, or they have to constantly arouse themselves by different things. So they binge, then they have cravings. So as the result of the craving, they're fulfilled, but they have a numbed pleasure response. So the pleasure that they feel is numbed, it's blunted. And that leads to more cravings, because they're like, well, I don't feel as great as I did the first time, so I really want more of it. So they binge even more. And there's more of a decline in the receptors and the pleasure response, and there's further desensitization. So this can be, as you can see, this can become really, really crazy. This can become really crazy. And as the author mentions, a numb pleasure response. desensitization, again, pleasure response, combined with a deep brain pathway leading to cravings and short-term release, which is the sensitization, is what drives most addictions. So it's very important to understand, like the overexposure, especially at a younger age, it changes the way people are conditioned to sexual responses. So any kind of cue or trigger that they may see that reminds them about, where they watch pornography, that circuit is going to be tapped into again, and they're going to start thinking about it again. The cravings will come, and people will start getting uncomfortable. People will start getting jittery. People will become irritable because they're like, well, I got to do it. I got to get my fix. And lastly, on this topic, while we're here, what ends up happening is as these receptors are going down, other things in life go down. Desensitization numbs people to the everyday pleasures, while sensitization makes the brain hyper reactive to anything associated with the porn addiction. So over time, this completely messes up your reward circuitry. So that's where a lot of people don't find any pleasure in outside things or things that other people may, because their circuitry in their brain is so excuse my language, so jacked up. It's become so warped and so desensitized and so blunted that they can't find those pleasures in those ordinary things, right? So this is, again, it becomes really, really fascinating, and it's really complicated at the same time. But as we'll talk about, there's always solutions. And lastly, but not least, this is the model that I've been trained in. This is the model of Dr. Patrick Carnes, which he calls the addictive system. So as you can see here, there's a system going here. Each part, feeds into the other, and then the addictive cycle has a whole cycle as well, and that which fuels that. So how does this play a part? So keeping the neural pathways in mind, again, a person creates a script in their mind for how they're going to act out. It becomes very predictable. As we, in many movies and things, people look at drug addicts or other things, and they go to a certain place where they used to smoke meth, or they used to do certain things. They will get that craving from that physical space, right? Because the brain recognizes, the brain is able to connect the dots, and those reward pathways start lighting up because they know this is where it used to be. I want that again, right? So here's an example of how to understand this addictive system that Dr. Carnes developed. So life is going well for this person. They know they struggle with, pornography, and they try to leave it go, and maybe they're like 2 weeks sober or something, right? Let's say their boss says something about negative, give them a negative feedback, like, oh, you could have done that better. I don't know why, maybe, you need to do your job better. Make sure you get this done. So this creates unmanageability, meaning life is kind of shaky right now, right? So this taps into, a lot of times addiction is a belief system, which basically there's many beliefs that go into it. Some of them are related to what we call lack of self-worth. So this person doesn't feel worthy. This person doesn't feel that they're worth it. This person feels like nobody cares about them. This person feels like they're addicted. There's no hope, et cetera, et cetera. So the belief system plays into them thinking, oh, well, oh my God, like, why did I do that? Like my boss was going to be so mad. I should start doing better. Otherwise I'm going to get fired, or what's going to happen. And, it leads to impaired thinking. It leads to this idea that, it's impaired thinking. It's not realistic, but it kind of makes them freak out. So it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I'm going to lose my job. Things are going to get bad. Or let's say they get into a fight with their wife, and they're like, well, she never understands, et cetera, et cetera. So it leads to impaired thinking. But then when remember where we talk about, they use it to deal with toxic emotions. So here, when things are getting unmanageable in life, and there's a belief system that is not conducive to healthy well-being, it's going to make them think about things very negatively, or in an unrealistic, or in an unhealthy way. Then they have these feelings, and they don't know what to do with them. That's when the neural pathways start lighting up. There is what we call the preoccupation. That's when the addictive cycle kicks in. Preoccupation, they start thinking about it, because it helps them relieve alleviate that stress, because that's what they find pleasurable, and that's what they find as their fix, quote unquote. So the preoccupation starts with like, okay, where is it going to be? What's going to happen? What am I going to do? They start fantasizing. So they're preoccupied with it, even though they may not. They start getting those cravings, and then again, we talked about addictive behaviors being somewhat ritualized. There's certain things that they do to streamline the process. The brain doesn't want to do additional things because it's not, whatever is the typical standard process, it will take that process. So the person goes through their ritual of, and again, as going back again, you have to keep in mind, during this process, what's being released? Dopamine, which is the craving. Remember, it's the craving that's coming. And the craving is what's there in the ritualization and preoccupation. So they're really like getting on this high, like they're really getting excited about it. And they're anticipating it. And they're going through their ritual. And then they interact and act out. So whatever this may be, like in the evening, they start just, going through YouTube, and then they end up at a porn website, and then they end up acting out, or just masturbating. And then when they act the compulsive, when they do the compulsive behavior, that's what leads to despair, which is then they realize what they've done, and it's a horrible feeling. They're devastated. They're like, I did it again. Why do I keep doing this? I'm such a horrible person. That's when this cycle starts. It shames them. It makes them feel like they're a horrible person. And again, the difference between shame and guilt, as defined by Dr. Brené Brown, is guilt is, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Shame is, oh, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. So they adopt this, and they feel like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to break out of this cycle. I'm stuck here forever. I promise I'm not going to do this every single time, but I keep doing it. I'm such a horrible, worthless person, and thus, this addictive cycle, when it's complete, it adds to the unmanageability. They're like, I'm going to be addicted all the time. I don't even have control over it. I can't even do anything. I just feel so hopeless and so worthless. I can't do it. So it adds to the unmanageability. So when something else happens, it kicks in again. I know this is, again, I tried to go a little bit in depth, but this may take some time. It may have not been so clear, but inshallah, that's something for another day, another time. Religious and social considerations. Shame is a big factor. In most of my work with Purify Your Gaze, most of the people that I meet and work with, they do not reach out. They don't reach out. They feel like they can't talk to anyone. Why? Because they feel like people will shame them. Because they feel like no one will understand. Because they feel like people will look at them differently. Because they feel like that that they're unworthy. There's this very common phenomenon. They feel like they're two people. They feel like they have like a split personality, like a Dr. Jekyll or Hyde kind of thing, where they're like out in the community. They're MSA leaders. They're in masajids doing khalaqat. They're businessmen. They're businesswomen. They're mothers. They're sisters in the community who are very active. People look up to these people. People look at them as like model brother and sister in their community, and wish their kids were like them. But when they go back to their home and they're tired, whatever, the preoccupation and things kick in. They act out, and they feel like there's a split personality, and they have this core belief. There's belief inside of them. If people were to find out about what I do, they will never respect me. Thus, they can never know. They can never know. So they keep it a secret. And as they say, addiction thrives in isolation. Addiction thrives in isolation. Shame thrives in isolation. Shame is this belief that I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of any kind of love or connection. I'm not worthy of any kind of support, compassion. I'm this wretched human being. And again, when they don't break out of that, when they don't share that, then they're stuck in their own head that makes them feel like the worst person on the earth. Yet at the same time, they are connected to the addictive process that keeps taking them back, because they they're so inextricably connected to it. So you can see how this can become a vortex of just pain and misery for many of these people, because they're like, well, I can't talk to anyone because if I do, they'll judge me. And again, keep in mind, they may have supportive people around them, but in their mind, they have this belief that if I tell someone else, if anyone else finds out, I will lose all credibility. I will lose everything that I've built. I will lose all respect. No one will respect me. No one will like me. No one would want me. No one would love me. So and then on the other hand, they keep turning to the addiction because that's the only thing they have to soothe themselves. Because normally people call someone else, they're like, hey, I had a bad day, please, can we talk about it? You cried out, things like that. Here, the only thing they have to turn to really let things out is pornography, which only adds to the shame, guilt, and the addictive cycle. So you can see how this can become really, really challenging for them to break out from. It also adds, like, they're always like, oh, I don't know if I don't want to share my sins. But it's one of those things that people don't recognize, that when they're seeking help, they're not sharing their sins to publicize. They're sharing them for support. And then again, we have the whole conversation about sisters or female porn addicts who definitely feel a lot more shame, and a lot more difficulty with respect to seeking recovery, because many guys will be like, oh, that's normal, for a girl. Oh, that's kind of weird, it's kind of out there, and they feel really judged and challenged, even though, again, it's important to recognize no one could have said a word about this, but they feel this way, and because of this belief and their feeling of theirs, they never reach out. But when they do, amazing things happen, and that's what we're going to talk about. So again, I unfortunately I may have painted like a really gloomy picture, but I want to kind of move towards solutions here and really raise the morale and show that there is a path beyond this darkness that people find themselves in, and they really find themselves stuck in. So this is a really good quote by Alice Miller. Where there had been only fearful emptiness, there is now unfolding an unexpected wealth of vitality. It is not a homecoming, since this home had never before existed. It is the discovery of home. It is the discovery of myself. And many people who take this journey feel this way. And also, on the other hand, a little bit of hope for Muslims struggling with pornography addiction. There's a hadith. It's being narrated in several books of hadith. The Prophet ﷺ saying, if somebody commits a sin, then says, "Oh my Lord, I have sinned, please forgive me," and his Lord says, "My slave has known that he has a Lord who forgives and punishes, forgives sins and punishes for us. I therefore have forgiven my slave." Then he remains without committing any sins for a while. Then he commits another sin and says, "Oh my Lord, I have committed another sin. Please forgive me." And Allah says, "My slave has known that he has a Lord who forgives sins and punishes for it. I therefore have forgiven my slave." Then he remains without committing any other sin for a while, and then he commits another sin for a third time and says, "Oh my Lord, I have committed another sin. Please forgive me." And Allah says, "My slave has known that he has a Lord who forgives sins and punishes for it. I therefore have forgiven my slave. He can do whatever he likes." The idea being, as long as the slave turns back to Allah, there's always forgiveness there. That recognition that Allah is there and Allah is there to support them is very, very powerful, and it actually helps them, give them a lot of hope. And many people lose that hope, and that's where a lot of challenges occur. So now let's talk about intervention. So again, we talked about pornography, cybersex addiction. What is it? What is the prevalence? What constitutes an addiction? We talked about some of the causes, some of the models that are being applied. So here, in terms of intervention, it's going to be a lot of hard work depending upon who you are and what you need. The first thing is, if you know someone who is either doing this work, if you know someone who is that you trust and can support you in this, talk to someone, break the cycle. Because that not telling someone, especially in an addictive behavior, again, you don't have to tell the world, but find that one person that you know is either a friend who's really supportive or someone who's understanding of these things. It's very important to be able to break that silence, because then that belief, remember that belief, If I tell somebody else, then everything's gone. It's all over. When you do that, and the other person's like, "Oh, bro, it's great that you're seeking help. It's great that you're actually taking charge of your own life. You're trying to get better, and that's awesome." That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. So talk to someone, break the cycle. Again, not just anybody, whoever has earned the right to hear your story. You can figure out who that person is. Secondly, therapy. This could involve impulse control. This could involve healing from trauma, from previous trauma, childhood trauma, or others. It could involve rebooting, which is basically what the NoFap community and other online communities call basically rebooting your brain. So your brain is not stimulated that way, those circuits. So when you let it go, when you for a certain period of time, it reboots itself. The brain is very plastic. It has the ability to heal. It has the ability to go back to its natural disposition and be able to feel the natural pleasures of life. So it could involve rebooting. CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist, I would encourage people to look for those if they have some in their area. Like I'm working through that, and I think it's a fabulous resource. It's a great model that they apply, and there's a lot of success in that group. With regards to sometimes the family, you may need to get support for spouse or kids as well, because addictions don't really just stay with the person; they impact everyone around that person. In terms of seeking help online, if that's what suits you, then there is Purify Your Gaze. As I mentioned, I do work for them. They're the only online community for Muslims who are struggling with sexually compulsive behaviors, brothers or sisters, males or females. These are some of the intervention. There's a lot more to it. There's books. We can go on for days, but I'm going to quickly go over some prevention work, which is, I think, more challenging than not. So parents have a very unique role in not just preventing this from happening, but also, doing what they can. And there's 4 steps that Connie Loftgreen in her book, The Storm of Sex Addiction, talks about that really, I think, resonate and make a strong case for how this can be avoided, right? And we're talking about the more modern approach to pornography addiction. So number 1 is connection. It's important to truly connect and bond with children. And I don't have to say this. At the same time, when one is so distressed, when parents are so distressed, when parents are stretched thin, then what ends up happening? Tempers flare, words are said, things are broken, etc., etc. So it's important for parents to, clean up their own mess. That's the best gift they can give to their children. We talk a lot about the youth, and the youth needs to improve. Well, the youth is very much learning from us, and we need to be able to work on ourselves, and the way we live life, they follow us, especially if there are children. So if you need to seek therapy, go for it. There's no shame there. You're doing it for your children, and parents can do anything for their children and for yourself as well. So have that strong connection with your with your child or your children, and that's important. And I think having family around and having strong neighbors also adds to that. Second is protection, is having clear expectations, rules, and consequences in the household. It not only teaches them to be responsible, but it also teaches them to keep some limits on themselves, because kids don't know boundaries or appropriate things. They don't. They learn from adults, because that's how the world works. A lot of times kids want to be excessive, and they'll say, no, that's not, you probably want to focus on your homework right now. If you're done, you can play your game. So those things are important. Secondly, limits in cyberspace is extremely important. That either this could be tech timeouts, like everybody puts in their phone for a little bit. I know this is a foreign concept, but like also again, and then some of this may sound very radically weird, but there's also permission for tech activity. You can install filters on your child's software. They can ask you to use the internet. Again, your children better. It depends upon who you are and what's your situation. So, but feel free to exercise that as the parent. But again, do it with warmth, connection, and consistency with structure. And it also helps them with delayed gratification. They, it helps them be more better at impulse control themselves as adults. So monitor their tech activity if you need to. Number 3 is respect. So again, respect is respecting oneself. So the parents to respect themselves. They're taking care of their bodies, taking care of their spirituality, taking care of their physical health. When then that's there, the child learns from that. And then respect for the child. How we talk to them. The way we interact with them, being at their level. You can show disappointment for bad behavior. Doesn't mean lose control. So respecting the child, and in our tradition, the Prophet ﷺ has said, like the one who is not kind to the young ones and respectful to the elders is not from amongst us. So it's important to keep that in mind. And last, but definitely not the least, is communication. Is talk to your kids, have a conversation with them, and know what's going on and how things are going. Initiate conversation. Discuss sexuality, especially if you're kids learn most of their sexual education from the outside world, from pornography and those things, and it rewires their thinking about intimacy, which is again not a good thing. So have that discussion with them if that's something you can do. So last but not least, resources and more information. I know we are around end time. So websites for more information. Your Brain on Porn is a great resource on the neurological effects of porn. Fight the New Drug is more of a movement started by college students. It has a lot of good resources and very much up to date. And then ITAP, the International Institute for Trauma and Addiction Professionals, it has sexhelp.com, where you can find some resources and some tests to see if you're struggling, and then what resources you can find. Services, as always, Khalid Center, if you're in the Bay Area. If you could also seek online services as well. Currently I'm the only CSAT certified or candidate going through this process. But again, if you need to seek help for trauma or other things, again, our therapists are there. Sexhelp.com. Purify Your Gaze is a great resource as well for people struggling with pornography or addictive behaviors. And then please seek your local resources. Thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, for being here. I know I kind of rushed, covered a lot of content today, but thank you so much for your patience. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at AbdulAziz Syed at khalilcenter.com. If you have any other comments, questions, or concerns, please visit us at khalilcenter.com. Again, that's KHALILCENTER.com. جزاك الله خير for joining. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.